The arrival. The test begins. Commander Vex stood aboard the flagship of the Karn Collective, staring at the blue planet below with cold satisfaction. For 3 centuries, the Karn had ruled over dozens of star systems with an iron fist. They had perfected the art of conquest not just through force, but through calculated cruelty. The viewing screen showed Earth rotating slowly, its continents visible through scattered clouds. This primitive world would serve their purposes perfectly. Behind the flagship, 200 massive transport vessels drifted in formation. Inside those ships, 8 million Zorvian refugees huddled in cramped conditions. They were the survivors of a war they never wanted, a people whose only crime was refusing to manufacture weapons for the Karn war machine. The Zorvians had been philosophers, artists, and healers. Their civilization had lasted 15,000 years without a single war. That peace had made them weak in the eyes of the Karn. And weakness was something the collective could not tolerate. A world unprepared. Dr. Sarah Chen sat in the International Space Monitoring Station outside Geneva, watching her screen with growing disbelief. The readings made no sense. 200 massive objects had appeared in near-Earth orbit within the last hour. They were not asteroids. They were not satellites. They were ships, and they were unlike anything humanity had ever built. She reached for her communications panel with trembling hands. Her call went directly to the United Nations Emergency Council. Within 30 minutes, every major government on Earth knew something impossible was happening. Within an hour, military forces across the globe went on high alert. But there was nothing they could do. The ships were already descending. The Karn vessels touched down simultaneously across every inhabited continent. They landed in the American Midwest, spreading across farmland in Iowa and Kansas. They came down in the Australian outback, their massive hulls crushing red sand beneath them. They arrived in the Siberian wilderness, on the African savanna, in the plains of Mongolia, and the pampas of South America. The ground shook. The sky filled with dust and smoke. And then, the doors opened. First contact. The Zorvians emerged slowly, hesitantly. They looked almost human at first glance, but the differences became clear quickly. Their skin had a faint blue-gray tone, like storm clouds before rain. Their eyes were larger than human eyes, reflecting light in shades of silver and gold. They moved with grace despite obvious exhaustion and injury. Many limped. Some were carried by others. Children clung to parents who had nothing left to give but their presence. Maria Rodriguez was the first human to approach one of the landing sites. She worked as a paramedic in rural Texas, and she had been driving home from a night shift when she saw the ship land in a field just off the highway. Training overrode fear. She saw people stumbling from the vessel, and her instinct was to help. She approached slowly, her medical bag in hand. A Zorvian woman collapsed just ahead of her, a small child clutched in her arms. Maria ran forward and knelt beside them. The woman looked up at her with eyes full of terror and exhaustion. Maria did not know what to say. She did not know if the woman could even understand her. So she simply opened her medical bag and began to help. The message. Above every landing site, holographic projectors activated simultaneously. The image of Commander Vex appeared, 30 meters tall, his face twisted in contempt. He spoke in flawless English, though the same message was transmitted in every major Earth language. Humans of Earth, his voice boomed across the fields and deserts. The Karn Collective presents you with a gift. These creatures are called Zorvians. They are the remnants of a species too weak to survive in the galaxy. They refuse to serve us. They refuse to fight. Now they are your burden. We will return in one of your years to observe the results. We expect you will provide entertaining data on what happens when a primitive species faces impossible challenges. The hologram flickered and vanished. The Karn ships lifted off, their engines creating massive windstorms that flattened crops and scattered debris. Within minutes, they were gone, disappearing beyond Earth's atmosphere and leaving behind 8 million refugees and a planet full of shocked humans. Chaos and questions. The initial response was predictable chaos. News organizations struggled to report what was happening. Social media exploded with footage of the aliens, speculation, fear, and anger. Governments issued conflicting statements. Some nations closed their borders immediately. Others called for calm. Religious leaders debated what this meant for humanity's place in the universe. Scientists scrambled to make sense of the biology, language, and technology of the visitors. In a small farming town in Iowa, Robert Mitchell sat with his family watching the news. He was 62 years old, a third-generation farmer who had never traveled more than 100 miles from the land his grandfather had worked. His wife Ellen sat beside him, their daughter Amy home from college, all three of them staring at images of alien beings standing in fields that looked just like their own. "They look scared," Amy said quietly. Robert nodded slowly. He had seen that look before in the eyes of animals trapped by floods or fires. It was the look of creatures who had lost everything and did not know if they would survive another day. "The news says they are dangerous," Ellen said, though her voice lacked conviction. "The news says a lot of things," Robert replied. "But I know what scared looks like. And I know what hungry looks like." The choice. By the second day, temporary quarantine zones had been established around each landing site. Military forces created perimeters while scientists in hazmat suits attempted to assess any biological threats. The Zorvians remained where they had landed, sitting in the dirt, waiting for whatever came next. They had no weapons. They had barely any belongings. Some had small bags. Others had nothing but the clothes they wore. Dr. James Patterson led the biological assessment team at the landing site in Nebraska. He had expected to find alien pathogens, incompatible biology, potential dangers. Instead, he found people. Their biology was remarkably similar to humans. They breathed the same air. They could digest similar foods. Their children played games that looked familiar. Their elderly sat together sharing what little they had. On the third day, he made his recommendation to the United Nations Emergency Council. "There is no biological threat," he reported. "These beings are refugees in every sense of the word. They need food, water, medical care, and shelter. The question is not whether they are safe for us. The question is whether we will choose to help them." That same day, Robert Mitchell loaded his truck with bags of seed corn, dried beans, bottled water, and blankets from his barn. Ellen made sandwiches, dozens of them, wrapped in plastic bags. Amy gathered old clothes that no longer fit. They drove to the nearest military checkpoint. A young soldier stopped them, his rifle held uncertainly across his chest. "Sir, this area is restricted," the soldier said. Robert looked past him to where Zorvian families sat in the dust. "Those people need food," he said simply. "I have my orders, sir." "I am not asking to break your orders, son. I am asking you to let me do what is right." The soldier looked at the truck full of supplies. He looked at the refugees. He thought about his own grandmother, who had come to America with nothing, fleeing a war she never wanted to be part of. He stepped aside. Robert drove through. Other vehicles followed. Within hours, a convoy of trucks from nearby towns arrived at the perimeter. They brought food, water, blankets, and medicine. They brought kindness to beings from another world. Building bridges. Learning to communicate. Dr. Lisa Park had spent 15 years studying linguistics and artificial intelligence. She had created translation algorithms for endangered human languages. Now she faced the greatest challenge of her career, decoding an alien language in a matter of weeks. The Zorvians communicated through a combination of spoken words and subtle color changes in their skin. Their language had 43 distinct phonemes and used contextual chromatic signals to indicate emotion, urgency, and grammatical structure. It was beautiful and complex. It was also essential to understand quickly. Lisa worked 20-hour days, collaborating with Zorvian volunteers who were desperate to communicate. One of them, a scholar named Tevin, had been a language teacher on the Zorvian homeworld. Despite having lost everything, he approached the work with patience and determination. On the 10th day, they achieved their first real conversation using the translation device Lisa had built. She asked Tevin to tell her about his world. He closed his eyes, and his skin shifted to soft shades of blue and purple, colors she had learned indicated sadness and memory. Our world was called Zorith, he said, his words converted to English through the device. It had 3 moons and oceans that glowed at night with living light. Our cities were built among the trees, not by cutting them down, but by growing our homes alongside them. We spent 1,000 years learning to live in balance with our world. What happened? Lisa asked gently. The Karn came. They wanted us to build weapons using our biological engineering. We could make living things do amazing tasks. They wanted us to make living things that killed. We refused. They gave us 1 month to reconsider. When we still refused, they destroyed everything. His skin turned gray, almost colorless. Lisa reached across the table and touched his hand. The gesture needed no translation. The first conflicts. Not everyone welcomed the refugees. Fear and anger spread through certain communities. A political movement calling itself Earth United claimed the Zorvians were an invasion force, that their helplessness was an act designed to lower human defenses. Protests erupted in major cities. In some places, violence followed. In Phoenix, Arizona, a group of men attacked a Zorvian family that had been taken in by a local church. They threw rocks and shouted threats. The family huddled against a wall, parents shielding their children. Then something unexpected happened. The church congregation formed a human wall between the attackers and the refugees. They stood firm despite the danger. "You want to hurt them, you go through us," said Reverend Michael Washington, his arms spread wide. The attackers hesitated, then retreated. Police arrived minutes later. The Zorvian family was shaken but unharmed. That night, the Reverend sat with them in the church basement. Through a translation device, the father thanked him. "Why did you protect us?" the Zorvian asked. "You do not know us." Reverend Washington smiled. "I know enough. I know you are far from home. I know you are afraid. I know you need help. That is all I need to know." Stories that changed minds. As translation technology improved, the stories of individual Zorvians began to spread. News organizations interviewed refugees. Their stories were broadcast around the world. People heard about scientists who had dedicated their lives to curing diseases. They learned about artists who had created works of beauty that lasted centuries. They met teachers, farmers, engineers, and parents who only wanted their children to be safe. One story captured global attention. A Zorvian teenager named Mira had been separated from her parents during the evacuation. She had been placed on a different transport ship. She did not know if they were alive. She did not know if she would ever see them again. A human volunteer named Sophie Martinez, who worked at a refugee coordination center in California, made it her mission to find Mira's parents. Sophie searched through databases, contacted every refugee center on Earth, and worked with Zorvian volunteers who were searching for their own lost families. 3 weeks later, she found them. Mira's parents were in a refugee settlement in Brazil. The reunion was arranged and broadcast live. When Mira saw her parents for the first time in 2 months, she ran to them. The embrace needed no translation. Tears fell from both human and Zorvian eyes watching the reunion. The video was shared billions of times. It reminded people that behind the numbers, behind the fear and politics, were individuals with the same hopes and fears that humans had. Small acts, big impact. Around the world, ordinary people made extraordinary choices. In Japan, a retired teacher named Hiroshi Tanaka began teaching English to Zorvian children at a refugee center outside Tokyo. He had no training in teaching aliens. He simply showed up every day with picture books and patience. In Germany, a baker named Klaus Schmidt started bringing fresh bread to the nearest Zorvian settlement each morning. He could not afford to give away much, but he gave what he could. Other bakers in the city saw what he was doing and joined him. Within a month, refugees across Germany were receiving fresh bread every morning from local bakers who volunteered their time and resources. In Kenya, a farmer named Amara Okonkwo taught Zorvian refugees how to grow crops in Earth's soil. The Zorvians had been agricultural experts on their world, but Earth's plants and growing conditions were different. Amara worked side by side with them, sharing knowledge that had been passed down through her family for generations. Together, they learned from each other. These small acts multiplied across the planet. Each act of kindness inspired others. Each story of cooperation spread hope. Slowly, the narrative began to change. A global response takes shape. The United Nations formed the Global Integration Initiative, led by Director Patricia Holloway, a former crisis management specialist who had worked in disaster zones for 20 years. She had seen humanity at its worst and its best. Now she had to organize the largest humanitarian effort in history. The challenges were immense. 8 million beings needed food, water, shelter, medical care, and eventually, a path to self-sufficiency. Resources were limited. Political opposition remained strong in many countries. But Patricia had learned something important in her years of crisis work: when people saw others helping, they wanted to help too. She organized the effort into regional coordination centers. Each center worked with local governments, NGOs, and volunteers. They established supply chains, medical clinics, temporary housing, language classes, and job training programs. The Zorvians were not passive recipients. They wanted to contribute. They wanted to work. They wanted to rebuild their lives. Patricia held a press conference 6 weeks after the arrival. She stood before hundreds of journalists and cameras broadcasting to billions of viewers. "We did not choose this situation," she said. "But we are choosing how to respond. These beings have lost everything. They have been thrown away by an empire that expected us to reject them or destroy them. I believe that empire made a mistake. I believe they underestimated humanity. Yes, we have problems. Yes, we have conflicts. But we also have something that empire does not understand. We have compassion. And compassion, it turns out, is stronger than they thought." The speech was translated into every language, including Zorvian. In refugee centers across Earth, Zorvians heard a human leader defend them, stand up for them, and promise them a future. Many wept. They had been told by the Karn that humans would be cruel. They had been told that humanity would destroy them. They were discovering something different. They were discovering hope.